in South Africa. And so the migrations that I'm going to be talking about will be predominantly about the Black people, the Black masses that had to be moved due to brutality, because most of the people that moved from the home states or the homelands moved into the inner cities, your Johannesburgs, your Cape Towns, your Pretorias, because they were forced to come here to work. Because Angiti, we all know, if you caught on with the lessons that were had prior, of how there was so much violence and brutality as to all these land acts that were put in place, so that Okoko or Omkhulwethu had to literally at some point give up their land, not because they wanted to, but because the law was forcing them to do that, by all these laws that, all these laws, these acts that were put in place, so that it could benefit, the minority. And not only that, but also as you go in depth, because of the wars. I mean, for instance, we're going to talk about migrations in South Africa, inland, started around 1904, but prior to that, there's also like earlier, dating ones, when there were like your World War Ones, for instance, your World War Twos, until we got to where we were with the whole apartheid regime, and how one was literally forced to move from their homelands to come into what we call your townships in South Africa, also Soweto, your Egurulenis. So initially they were not just started, they weren't like coincidentally formed, but it was literally a place where they could control the majority. And because you only came to your Sowetos, the East Rands, you name them, all these other places you find all around South Africa, where there's the townships, you'd understand the reason why the slums were formed or the townships were formed was because they needed to have their labor close by, but not too close to them, hence there was townships and then there was towns. And just to throw in something to make you think, maybe I'll give you the answer later on. So part of the lessons around migrations and the townships, I would say, if you ever give yourself that time where you go into literally wherever you're from, if Puma Eguruleni or Puma Soweto or Puma Kwalanga, whichever township you come from, try and look at, if you're able to, try and look at how the town was planned, then you would understand even the systematic elements of how we're literally forced into being in the townships, because the townships weren't really places that we were meant to be living in. But somehow, because we are so vibrant and resilient, we made sure that we made Ilogishi, we took pride in being Elokshin, but actually Ilogishi was never meant to be a place where we're supposed to live and thrive. It was meant to be a place that literally is like a concentration camp. It's supposed to demoralize the Black child. It's supposed to frustrate you if you've got dreams, because you're in the township, they've already systematically programmed, everything of your life, to be literally stuck in the hood and never moving away or thinking outside, dreaming bigger or larger, but moving right away, I get carried away. So we'll start with Soweto. So in Soweto, we all know it's called Soweto, but it's literally an acronym for Southwestern Townships. And the reason why they had East Southwestern Township is because it was divided by tribes or clans. Just like how it is even now, where you go to Aboshawela and you find it's Tonga predominant people, it's your vendors, and then you move to other places like Hodlamini, and it's Zulus predominantly, and then you move around in other parts. I'll talk about I think even Nala Katlehong, because I'm from Katlehong. So from Katlehong, it's even in how it's placed, Kotongoza, because it's predominantly, it was placed for Basotho, Sotho people, Koko Omandela, Ontlapho, places that closer people would stay, and so on and so forth. Okay, so moving right along. So why was migration important in history? So migration was important because the government then, even now, had to make sure that they had to bring in people from the homesteads to come into town so that a civilization could start, so that the mines could be worked, so that the kitchens or the suburbs, the households would be taken care of. So hence the whole migration of people moving from when they lived home in the homesteads, either KwaZulu-Natal or Eastern Cape, to moving to the townships in concentrated places. Yeah. So, but also then, I mean, you go to places also like your Cape Towns, where, for instance, I'm just gonna read a bit of what's written, right? What I gathered. So it says Johannesburg is the largest city in South Africa. Before the 1837 arrival of the Transvaal Boers, descendants of Dutch settlers, the area that is now Johannesburg was occupied by the Sotho Tswana peoples. In early 1886, gold was discovered on the Witwatersrand Ridge. By 1889, Johannesburg boasted a population of 3,000, as well as a hospital, stock exchange, and electrical lighting. 3 years later, this number had ballooned to 102,000 dwellers. Okay, so I'm gonna just move around just to have you understand the whole context of immigration, not from the Lani bourgeoisie perspective, but from just inner South Africa, how migration took place, how people from your Lesotho's, your Botswana came, they all came because they needed to come here to be labor or cheap labor, yeah, because because with the wars also, they needed black bodies that would be going to war to fight for whatever they claimed is theirs. So hence there was the force where there was black soldiers that had to come and fight and revolt against something that was not even their own war, but because of the government, because of legislature at the time, one was forced to join the army, and you being part of the army meant you need to be fighting for whatever side that you are put in. Okay. So I'm going to move from the migrations part, and then I'm going to just jump into a bit of the uprisings, the uprisings of so the uprisings are literally from because Soweto uprisings in 76 are like at a later stage when the students decided to be up in arms. I mean, I'm thinking about the other elements that cropped up, like for instance, Sharpeville, before the Sharpeville massacre, the movements around the political parties that were formed, like for instance, your PACs that were formed, your ANCs that were formed, because as we all know, the apartheid regime didn't take just one body or one entity or one individual for it to be dismantled, but there were so many other individuals, so many organizations, including church, including all these other elements, even people in your writers, your photographers. So there was a vast array of individuals that came in to fight the whole thing about the uprising. Okay. And I think from what everybody knows, so what I did is I wanted to take a bit of what you already know, but also I wanted you to think about the other elements that you probably didn't know about, or that you knew but not so many, like for instance the Craddock Four. We're talking about the Sharpeville massacre. Like there's so many injustices that happened within that time, that yes, of course, with the Soweto uprising became the biggest of all, because here was gallant young students that decided, well, no, our parents have been trying to fight, and you know how it is when it's the battle of the stomach, the battle of the survival, the battle of giving your children the best, somehow, one way or another, the parents are somewhat forced to be subservient because after all, they need to still feed the babies. They need to put, roofs over their heads and all of that. So then we know about the famous story about Hector Peterson, how he got, enrolled in the whole Soweto uprising, whereas he was just a kid, not really necessarily going to the march per se. He became like what can you say? I want an English word. Like he became a victim, like like a victim of circumstance, but as part of the youth that decided that they wanted to demonstrate. So why was the Soweto uprising happening? The Soweto uprising happened because there was demonstrations and protests led by Black school children in South Africa that began on the morning of 16 June 1976. Okay, students from numerous Sowetan schools, and not only just Soweto, but it was also other parts of Johannesburg, began to protest in the streets of Soweto in response to the introduction of Afrikaans as the medium of instruction in local schools. It is estimated that 20,000 students took part in the protests. They were met with fierce police brutality, and many were shot and killed. The number of people killed in the uprising is usually given as 176, but estimates of up to 700 have been made. In remembrance of these events, 16 June is now a public holiday, as we know, and it's called Youth Day. Okay. And then let's get into the causes of the protests. So Black South African high school students in Soweto protested against the Afrikaans Medium Decree of 1974, which forced all Black schools to use Afrikaans and English in a 50-50 mix as languages of instruction. The regional director of Bantu Education, Northern Transvaal region, J.G. Erasmus, told circuit inspectors and principals of schools that from 1 January 1975, Afrikaans had to be used for mathematics, arithmetic, and social studies for standard 5, which is, I think, grade 7 now, according to the Afrikaans Medium Decree. But also part of, just going back to why there were also uprisings also. And I think it's part of it's gotten in, I think it's Tsietsi Mashini's speech, where they say not only were they just fighting against the government because of this discriminative being forced to study or learn in Afrikaans and English, and literally sort of like segregated from learning about yourself or learning any language in your mother tongue, but also part of the reasons why these were done was because with some of them, because of how system was done, what would happen is the men would go, and I mean, you can look at it even now, you could see. So even in the Elokishini, or where there's like your train stations or your taxi ranks, not so far away, kukhona ibhara. And ibhara is a place where most parents would literally go there, like fathers would literally spend most of their time there from work, because he's been working from Gupas John from Monday until Friday, and Friday becomes that, ufuna ukehlisa oil, ufuna uphuza, because it's been a lot. He's been undermined, he's being disrespected, and all of these other things. So with that being said, so part of the other things that they were fighting against was that they kind of understood how the system was playing it, how all it ever wanted to do was to frustrate the Black man. And in making sure that they frustrate the Black man, they had to make sure that they even break, the family unit. Because, I mean, if Ubaba goes to work Monday to Friday, or Umama is emakishini, and she's working there, chances are there's already disruption in the family unit, and then you add alcohol, which is one of the other reasons why we as South Africans are ranked the highest as a country. all around the world as alcoholics, you know. So then you look and you get to see and you study with, you know, actually all of this that's been happening in history, it's not by sheer coincidence of brutality. No, no, no. It was engineeringly, you know, orchestrated because they knew exactly what they wanted to do after all. Okay. So without getting carried away, and then I'm going to move away from, I think I touched a bit on the uprising. And then I'm also going to go into apartheid, you know, in actually getting to understand the context of what was the apartheid, when did it start? And I mean, in my own personal belief, I just still believe that one way or another, we still subjected into that whole apartheid regime. We might be in the democratic you know, country or nation, but if you were to look at the status quo of literally the majority of Blacks, there's few of us that are affluent. There's few of us that are making or breaking, you know, stereotype and getting into industries that were predominantly white or predominantly male and white, you know. So not much has changed. We're still having systematic issues, even modern day 2020, you know. And this goes even further into our education, you know. But also the reason why apartheid was done. So what is apartheid? Apartheid in Afrikaans means, in English, it means apartness. It is the name of the policy that governed relations between the white minority and the non-white majority of South Africa. Okay, guys, Unkanyezi now is disturbing us in class. Sorry about that. Please.
School thing?
Okay, sorry about that. All right. So okay, so it means apartness. It's the name of the policy that governed relations between the white minority and the non-white majority of South Africa. And by non-white, it means Black, or all the other races that are considered to be non-white, your Indians, your coloreds, you know, Chinese, of South Africa during the 20th century. Although racial segregation had long been in practice there, the apartheid name was first used about 1948 to describe the racial segregation policies embraced by the white minority government. Apartheid dictated where South Africans, on the basis of their race, could live and work, the type of education they could receive, and whether they could vote. Events in the early 1990s marked the end of legislated apartheid, but the social and economic effects remained deeply entrenched. Like I was saying, Wuti, yes, 2020, so many years down the line, but we're still in that same juxtapose. Okay. When did apartheid start? Racial segregation had long existed in white minority governed South Africa, but the practice was extended under the government led by the National Party from 1948 to 1994. And the party named its racial segregation policies apartheid, Afrikaans apartness. The Population Registration Act of 1950 classified South Africans as Bantu, Black Africans. Colored, those are mixed race, or white. And Asian, Indian, and Pakistani category was later added. Other apartheid acts dictated where South Africans, on the basis of their racial classification, could live and work, the type of education they could receive, whether they could vote, who they could associate with, and which segregated public facilities they could use. And like I was saying, Wuti, I mean, it's 2020, and funny enough, we still find ourselves in that type of situation, Wuti. For instance, let's talk about education currently. How because you are in a certain region, like for instance, because I'm in Katlehong, I can never apply for my daughter in a town school because of the area. I think some of you that have done this have seen how. So it's not by coincidence, like how you are literally forced to live within the township and not move. And if you force or you want to move, then the system will always find loopholes or ways to keep you within the hood, because literally townships were always meant to be concentration camps, places where people are demoralized and they don't, dream anything aside or bigger than that. Okay. So what I also wanted to add was apartheid legislation. And the reason why I have, I'm sure you got the last document, and the one that I'm going to have now also is going to be very in depth, because I wanted you to get to understand even the laws, the acts that were there. So with them making all these acts that were there, how they literally controlled, the Black masses, and how it was hard to move around, the only thing that they ever wanted from us was labor. So to keep the labor, they needed to move us into the townships. And got into the townships, it was like, we don't want you living into our towns. When I want your hands, I want your skill. So because I want your skill and I want your, your hands to make sure that this machine is well oiled, I'm gonna put you very far, because when I was saying it at first, you must literally look at how systematic living in the township is, or town planning altogether in all the townships of South Africa. You will get to realize, Guti, when you get into any township, or before you get into the township, you'll first get into the industrial area. And then as you move further down, there will be your white areas. And then you'll move further down, there'll be your complexes or whatever, not so far away. And then further down, like concentrated, crammed, you will find us, Elokshin. That's where we've always been, placed. And I think you can go to any township in South Africa, you will get to see Guti, town planning is the same. Where you find Utaki, Uselokshini, they are further away from everything. So the only thing that you literally need to do in your life is to move from where you are in the concentration camp, moving up, passing the town to get to employment, and from employment going back home, because we can't have you in our towns also. We had to make sure work is so far that when you think about spending time in town and looking at the time, you're always thinking, transportation, this, that. So it's always been so systematically done in such a way that there's no bypassing it, there's no way of moving out of the hood, and also I guess it's that whole thing, Yoguti, the more we influence our children, or the youth that is upcoming now, to actually get to understand, Yoguti, there's more to life, there's more to being in the hood, and having them think beyond, exposing them to a lot of things, letting them learn about themselves, having sessions like these, giving them literature that is, relevant to them, then it also changes their mindsets and how they live. Then instead of having a youth that would be literally living in the hood, and the only thing we do is we go to schools, we get affluent, we get the work. Yes, we move into the burbs, but we still come back to Lokshini, to Puza and Nokdawa, So somehow, some way, we need to be changing the narrative, of being young, Black, gifted, and making it to how do you influence the hood that you're from? How do you change the young ones around you? Okay, so moving right along. Publication of legislation. Apartheid legislation was published in the Government Gazette of South Africa, known as the Afrikaans term Stadskoerant, during apartheid. This was the official medium used by the apartheid government in South Africa to communicate with the public. This medium continues to be used today by the post-apartheid governments, although publication of the Gazette have stopped and is no longer available in the courts as before. The Gazette is available through paid subscription on an internet website. Segregationist legislation before apartheid. Although apartheid as a comprehensive legislation project truly began after the National Party came into power in 1948, many of these statutes were preceded by the laws of the previous British and Afrikaner administrations in South Africa's provinces. An early example of this is the Glen Grey Act, passed in 1894 in Cape Colony, and which had the effect of diminishing the land rights of Africans in scheduled areas. The listing of the segregation, population registration and segregation. So one, there was the Population Registration Act of 1950, which required that every South African be classified into a number of a number of racial population groups. This act provided the foundation upon which the effect edifies of apartheid would be constructed. Two, the Reservation of Separate Amenities Act 1953 allowed public premises, vehicles, and services to be segregated by race, even if equal facilities were not made available to all races. I think you know about that whole way you'd find those signs, non-white, white, where who could go where, and that whole aspect. The Reservation of Separate and Amenities Act was repealed by the Discriminatory Legislation Regarding Public Amenities Repeal Act 1990. And the Population Registration Act was repealed by the Population Registration Act Repeal Act 1991. But the racial classifications remained on the population register until 1992. Job reservation and economic apartheid. There was the Mines and Works Act of 1991. There's the Native Building Workers Act of 1951. There's Native Labor Settlement of Disputes Act 1953. Industrial Conciliation Act 1956. This was more on the job reservation and the economic element of how even by the system apartheid was positioned. And so what I'll do is I'll try and also get all these acts for you so that you go through them, because I want you to get a broader perspective, of how we cannot be saying 2020, we need to get over apartheid, it's long done, but you need to sort of understand, how it systematically broke the black family, the black person, woman, man, the father, the mother, the youth, because of how it was systematically done. Then you will understand why we are where we are now and why it seems like history is still repeating itself even now. There's the segregation in education. There was the Bantu Education Act in 1953. There was the Extension of University Education Act of 1959. There was the Colored Persons Education Act in 1963. There was the Indians Education Act in 1965, right? And then there was also sexual apartheid, because everything was, clustered. It was systematic. There was the Immorality Act 1927, forbade extramarital sex between white people and black people. Two, the Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act 1949, forbade marriages between white people and people of other races. Three, the Immorality Amendment Act of 1950, forbade extramarital sex between white people and people of other races. So these laws were repelled by the Immorality and Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Amendment Act in 1985, right? And then there was land tenure and geographic segregation, that whole element of how, yes, in your lineage, you had a title deed of Umhlaba, Mhlambe Lingana, or somewhere in the Eastern Cape. But because of everything else that happened systematically, there were these acts that were put in place to strip, Udaki of the land, so coming modern day where they like, but what you say, we want the land back, what are you going to do with the land? But in actual fact, the land has always been ours, so that's another contra into it. So the land tenure and geographic segregation, the acts were the Natives Land Act 1913, limited land ownership by black people to 8% of the land area of South Africa. So let that simmer. So black people the only Black people that could own land. They had 8% from how literally everything was happening. There was the Native Trust and Land Act of 1936, expanded this limit to encompass about 13% of land area of South Africa. There's the Asiatic Land Tenure and Indian Representative Act 19. Oh wow, okay. Ooh, I'm sorry, was I muted the whole time?
Sorry about that. It was only for a few seconds.
Oh, okay. For a moment, I was like, oh my goodness. All right. So there was the Asian Act, land tenure and Indian representative, because then they also had restricted land ownership by Asians in towns and cities. There was the Group Areas Act 1950, reenacted in 1957 and 1966, divided urban areas into group areas in which ownership of residents was restricted to certain population groups. There was the Group Areas Development Act, 1955, formed part of the machinery for the implementation of the Group Areas Act. There was the Colored Persons Communal Reserves Act 1961 and the Rural Colored Area Act 1963, established to reserve areas for colored people in rural areas. The Preservation of Colored Areas Act number 30 Act number 31 of 1961 further entrenched colored areas in law and created a legal mechanism to seize land for white guardians. Okay, so because I've got 10 minutes, like I said, I know I just get carried away. But so what I'm gonna do is I'll have Ubabu, I'll give Ubabu Msibi, Ubab Sandile, all of this. I'll try and and not overwhelm you like the last time. I'll try. But there are so many acts and so many laws that were put in place that even current day, we are still subjected to them. And so I think because I've got 10 minutes, I'm not gonna go any further. I'll just end it there. I hope you really enjoyed our session. I hope I didn't get too carried away. And if there's any questions, I'm sure I'll get to have them, and then I'll give feedback. But also, yes, so from now on, the only thing I'd want to say, or a challenge that I'd want to give to you, is I want you to literally be very aware of the system and how it's been working within your own, surrounding, So I want you to go back, like if uhlala elokishini, ngicela uyibheke i-town planning, and come back to me and say if maybe I was right or I was wrong. But just see how, it's systematically done, where as you go into a place, there is the firms, the workplace, I'm a firm and all of this, and then from there it's the suburbs, and then it's the town, and then like literally that's where you find the townships. That's where you find the people. We are segregated in one, like further. It's like we're pushed to stay there, like you must stay there. And so my challenge for you is I need for you to be thinking of other ways of making sure that you change the analogy and the whole inheritance we've had about the townships, because yes, we find ourselves 2020, we're still living in the townships. Yes, we're going to the best schools, we're getting exposed to all these other things. Let that be not just for you, but let it stream into even the influence around you, let the youth dream bigger, let us be like, that saying, I think it's a Mexican saying that said, they tried to bury us, but they didn't. Little did they know that they were planting us. So all I need for us to be doing is literally like Ubabu Msibi's Arise Black Child movement. We need to literally be doing that. As you wake up, wake the next, let it be a ripple effect, let the hood be transformed into a different perspective, let's be thinking outside the box. Let's do other things that would be influential to the future of the townships, you know, of the people that live in the townships. Let the mindsets change, you know. Asibe nabodaki that have always loved ourselves, you know, and let's just progress and be better. I'm gonna leave that to that. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed yeah, all of this. Thank you very much, and you shall have your pack before the end of today. Yabong.
Thank you so much, Sister Boho. We really appreciate that reflection. I think we can all attest Oguti, apartheid and white supremacy is still very much entrenched in our present day realities. So thank you for that reminder and sparking that desire and that fire in us to not relax, but to know what the struggle continues and that we have a role to play in making sure that we arise and obviously for the Black nation to arise. So thank you so much. We appreciate that conversation, and yes, we did enjoy it as much as you did. What I think we can do before we move on to Upodionela is for the next 5 minutes or so, if anyone has a question, a remark, anything they want to say, I'll give them a few minutes. So if you have a question, you have something to say, please feel free to unmute your mic and make your comment. I'll take it. Okay, Sis Noctula, I see you've unmuted your mic.
Yes, ngiyabonga. Siyabonga kakhulu sisi wami. You said so much. I don't even know where to begin. Nale ndaba yokuthi siyekele ukuphuza. Hey, yeah. You know, zikhona izathu njengoba uzishilo izathu why it is that we become our own worst enemies. Kodwa ke, we're not gonna stay there. What you raise really is very important. Always mangekhaya, Soweto, Rockville. Angithi ungena la emasojeni. It's like you are being funneled in. It's like you are being funneled in so that should there ever be a need to close you in, makuba na nomzabalazo wabantu, there's gonna be almost a gate that shuts us in, because I mean this thing, if foresight yakhona is so far ahead, because all the time, you know, these people knew that whatever it is that they are doing might actually backfire. And I just want to say, all over the world, literally, that's been their strategy. To take the indigenous people, plant them in never places, but make sure that should they ever have the audacity to rise against them, there's a way of foiling that. So whenever I go home, I'm like, now I'm entering, you know, Soweto. So I hear what you're saying. But my thing, you know, with that book that I'm reading so much, that was shared this week, Situ. One of the things that I learned, I think on page, around page 43, Konalapo, was, no, earlier on in fact, was that the East for us is so important, such that whatever rituals we do, we face East. But then even when we die, we are supposed to face East. And I asked my husband, is that still the case? Or are we facing to other directions when we die, such that even as we sit here, you know, we might have Izinyanya who have turned their backs on us. So for me, it's not so much a question to you, but it's a question to everyone here that, you know, even today, it could be that when we bury our dead, we bury them such that they turn away from us. And might that also still be part of the plan, even with the people who are now in charge, which for me is like worse than anything I can even fathom, because it's one thing to wage a war on people who are alive, but to also castrate them in death, I know it's something else. So I'll just leave it there. But you know, these are the things that we need to be taking cognizance of, to say that when we go to Ematuneni, where are our people facing? And what does that mean for our well-being and our ability to regenerate as a people? That's what I wanted to throw in there. Thank you.
Thank you. I was cutting
Bonga
you.
Yeah, because we are kind of some point. But it's a beautiful point, Sisi. I mean, I think you even look at it even now. I think systematically, we all know this. The biggest thing that they've ever wanted to do was to literally not only displace you from land physically, but even spiritually. We've been dispossessed, you know. And with that said, I mean, you look at, for instance, yes, so I decide, okay, I've got the money, I leave Ikatlehong and I go the hill or wherever, you know, in these affluent suburbs. Chances are I will still not be able to practice my cultural rights, uklaba, and all of that, because there's also literally within the suburbs also there's still acts, or there's laws that still forbid me to be me, you know. So somehow, one way or another, the law, the acts, you know, the rulings have always been to make sure that you can never fully claim your Africanness, either it being your spirituality, your dress sense, your education, whatever. You've been so displaced in so many ways, you know, that it's evident in everything. It's very evident in everything. But thank you so much for that point, Sisi. Nyabong.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. If there's anyone else, but please keep it short, like not more than a minute. You're welcome to also make your input.
Hi. Thank you so much for what you've done and all the research that you've undertaken. I'd like to first commend you for that. And you know, I studied town planning myself, and it's only now, I think, after 10 years of working, that I realize as well that the curriculums that we get taught in varsity or technicon, or you know, in tertiary institutions, also does not go into the very details of our existence and what happened. So it poses a danger to this professionalism and these academic accolades that we are priding ourselves with, which in the end do not become practical tools for us to use when we work and to be critical enough of whatever we're doing. So you end up being this accountant or this lawyer, but who's not really gotten into that profession with that conscientization of this is why I chose to do this so that I can do A, B, C, D. So it's very important for young people that are listening to these sessions and start tertiary and choose their careers to really think deeper in terms of strategically what I've chosen to study. How am I going to plug it in to undo this system? Unfortunately, yes, you can question lecturers and we can question the curriculum and want to decolonize it, but somewhere, somehow, I think choosing what we study and what we get into is it's quite crucial. I will leave it at that. There's so much I want to say, but I will definitely leave it at that. Thank you so much. Thank
you. Thank you.
Ms. Sheena, thank you so much for that reflection, for that input. I'm willing to take 2 more people at the most. If there's anyone else with a question, comment, reflection, but it must be no longer than a minute, please.
Yes, good day. Yeah, it's Dira. Yes, speaking. Thank you, sister, for the lecture that you gave us. My question is, in terms of apartheid, do we still have the apartheid mentality in our mind, or apartheid has vanished? That's my question for you. Another thing, in terms of the
Could you
government,
please repeat it again?
is the
Because at
government
some
still
point
using
you
the
were
same?
sounding very faint.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah, my first
Yeah, I can
point
hear you.
is, since we're talking about, the first point is, if you're talking about apartheid, is the apartheid still in the black mind, or is apartheid gone? Regarding the systematical weapons that they have done in terms of the parliamentary, because we are using the parliament, and the way I understand, it's still the white man's parliament. It's not our parliament. Like we are using a white man's table to fight the white man. Will it be possible for us to win the battle regarding the white man in that mentality? Thank you.
Oh wow. Sure. All right. Abudidira, right? So, in my own honest opinion, I don't believe Khori apartheid is gone. Yes, we might have voted, but for me, it's like it only gave us, do we say right? Because now we are able to say who we want in power. But that's as far as it goes when it comes to having won apartheid. But when you look at it from, like I was saying, you look at the places that we find ourselves in, requalificationing, ngwana gago is forced to be in a township school, even if you were to try and say, no, but I work in Alberton or Gosenton, so I want my child to be close by. But because Gamolao, and it's something that I've taken the education system at heart, or to task, to say, but now why is it that you are saying I've got the right to take my child to any school, Mara, when I want to do that, you tell me about how it needs to be within radius? So one, we are still controlled, we are still kept into the township. And not only that, I mean, if you look at even the developments that are happening in our townships, everywhere you will see there's a mall coming soon, mall that are being built. And one of the things was, for me, it's not necessarily for economic emancipation, but it was a matter of the things that you come to town for, so that you don't come to our towns because it's crowded, So you look at all these other elements that are put in place, and then you realize, no, actually, apartheid is not only just in our mentals, but it's so systematic. It even goes through into our spiritual elements. It goes through into the food that we eat. It goes into the houses that we live. So we can never say we are free and therefore apartheid does not exist, on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure there are challenges that you are faced with as a Black man that is living in the country. I'm not sure which part of South Africa you live in, but I'm very sure that most of the challenges that you are faced with are normally Black predominant issues because of how you are located, where you're located, and the type of work that you do. And so literally you've been pushed to literally, oh, so you're in Northern Cape. I'd love to understand what is the the concept. Are you able to access your public service places? And even if you are able to access those public spaces, to what extent are they? Are you able to use them, or is it that whole thing? Highly qualificationing, you get substandard service, as opposed to if you're going to the town to get any health care or education or whatever. So in one way or another, we are still oppressed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll literally take the last one. Ash, I'm seeing a hand. I don't know if you want to say something.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Ostebo, just to explain everything, the way we explain thing. But within this context, I just want to find out, with all this happening today, where are Black economists and Black lawyers who can explain these things much better, like uh, political scientists who can uh, uh, bring in some platforms or organizations that could explain the way geography of this country is and the geopolitics within this country. Where are those people who can explain it much better? I can't be coming from maybe telecoms and have a better view of what's currently happening. What's happening with the education that they went to universities for? Like the structure of Soweto itself, the structures of Tembisa, the way these roads and the main roads are built. Are there any political scientists who can go deep into this and maybe find the answers of the apartheid architecture? Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. Thanks.
Yeah. That's a very brilliant question. And I'm sure then this would be like a plea or a call to say, then we need to get people that have been involved in your town plans and, you know, all these other factors that you've been mentioning. But as far as I know, law, your town planning, any other academic, any other academic institution that you've always gone into, no matter what you're studying, will always be telling you about mostly colonial white perspectives. It's never been like I've never heard of any syllabi where literally it spoke to the Black student that is studying that particular, you know, subject, either it being law, either it being accounting, either it being political science. From my maybe very limited perspective, I'm yet to hear somebody say, actually, where I'm studying, the stuff that I'm doing is relevant to me as a Black student and from coming from a Black environment. I don't know if that answers you.
Yes,
you so
thanks for that.
Thank you, Brother Ash. I think we should also take some initiative and do some research. I'm sure there are people who are doing you know, some research on this and obviously publishing information on this. I know Steve Biko speaks a bit about it, but let's do some research as well and get a more comprehensive answer in that regard. Thank you so much for that session, ladies and gentlemen. We are moving on to the next lesson, which will be given by Yonela Boya, and he will be focusing on the African resistance, something we hear very little about, you know, the wars against colonialist invasions. So he will be taking us through that conversation. Brother Yonela Boya is a young Black male from Katlehong. He is a writer and a poet. He has worked and volunteered for various community organizations, including Ebukosini Solutions. Brother Yonela, thank you so much. You were here with us last week. Thank you for coming back this week. We are excited to have you. Over to you, sir.
Molweni Sanbonani Dumilang. Thank you again, Butsandile and the Ice Black Child, for inviting me. Thank you to everybody that is on today to come together and to learn and to share. So I hope people have their pens and papers, because today what I planned was to do something on a very surface level, but with a lot of information. So this is just so that when we capture that information, we're able to do our own research. I thought that would be important to encourage that. So I'm going to just start here with the overview. This presentation is meant to be a conversation starter and to give an introductory exploration of African resistance. It will explore African resistance against invasion, slavery, colonization, and apartheid globally. We will highlight only some examples of African resistance before the Berlin Conference as well as after. We will explore the subject within mainly two headings. The first heading we will explore African resistance on the continent, and then in the second heading we will explore examples of African resistance outside of the continent. And our exploration will be on a basic introductory level, and we'll give some dates and names, and thus we will also attempt to give a chronological account of these examples and try to give us a perception of a timeline of African resistance. We will also attempt to show how the culture of African resistance is a continuum, each generation influencing the next. And the aim of the presentation is to give the listener an introduction to some of the many examples of African resistance, so as to inspire them to not only do further research on their own, but also for them to be inspired to resist in their individual capacities. To remind the listener that as a people, we are being warred against, and as such, a culture of resistance is one that we need to adopt and internalize so that we are able to respond to our reality. So resistance on the continent. Let us begin with the 15th century, the 1600s, when Europe still had no to little knowledge of the central and southern parts of the African continent. Here, the Arabs had already invaded most parts of the North Africa and had already established slave routes. And this was partly made possible by internal conflicts within and among African societies that weakened us. The Portuguese entered these Arab markets and became the first European country to actually trade in African bodies. While it is true that some African people were involved in the trade and enslavement of other African people,
Warriors, is it just me who is not hearing anything anymore?
I also can't hear him.
No, it's not just you.
Okay, noted.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes, now we can.
No, I apologize. I don't know what happened. I think network, and it kicked me out. I'll just continue where I left off. in 1630, Queen Zinga leads many resistance campaigns against the Portuguese and their enslavement of African people. And then not long after the arrival of the Dutch in the Cape in 1652, they are met with resistance from the indigenous populations, the Khoi, and because the Dutch now were encroaching their lands. The first recorded a conflict between actually 4 years after they arrived in 1656. And then there would be many conflicts between the Khoi and the Dutch. And then the Xhosa engaged in what are known as the frontier wars. And some of these wars involved the Khoi and the San as allies of the Xhosa. And then these wars were on and off and lasted for 100 years. And then that is between 1797 and 1878. And then these frontier wars are actually the longest recorded wars of resistance against invasion and eventual colonization. And then many other wars of resistance in Southern Africa were fought by many other language groups, like the Zulus in 1838 in the Battle of Blood River, and in 1879 in the Battle of Isandlwana, and the Bapedi under King Sekhukhune in 1876 against the Boers, and in 1879 against the British. And then in the 1800s, the Ashanti Kingdom fought different resistance wars against the British, including the most famous war of the Golden Stool, where Queen Mother Ashanti in a meeting where the men were discussing the relations with the British, and they were discussing giving up. And it was the Queen Asante who said that if the men will not fight, it is the women that will fight. And she led that famous resistance battle. And then in the early 1900s, there was the Maji revolt, meaning sacred waters, on the coast of Africa, in what is in the east coast of Africa, in what is known today as Tanzania, against German colonization. This was a multi-ethnic movement that comprised of various groups in the area. This included the Shamba, the Zaramo, the Ngoni, the Ngulu, the Kami, the Swahili, amongst many others. And then in the late 1800s, 1896, fascist Italy would attempt to invade and colonize Ethiopia, but was resisted successfully by Emperor Menelik, who fought alongside his Empress Taitu Betal. And then still on the continent in 1912, Pixley Kasime, Sol Plaatje and John Langalbalele in South Africa, along with other chiefs, people's representatives, church organizations, and other prominent individuals, founded the South African Native National Congress, which later became the ANC. And this was partly because of the land dispossession of Africans that was taking place at the time through, I think, the Land Act. And then the ANC is actually the oldest party on the continent. And then in 1944, the ANC Youth League is established by youth who are more militant And then the founding president of the Youth League was Bob Anton Lambede, who was a lawyer and who did his articles in a law firm that was under Pixley Kasime. And then it is Lambede who must be credited for pioneering the philosophy of African nationalism here in South Africa. And then in 1945, a Pan-African Congress was convened in Manchester, which was attended by 90 delegates, 26 of which were from Africa. And then they included many scholars, intellectuals, political activists who would later go on and influence or be influential leaders in their various countries, countries' independence movement and civil rights. This included people like Jomo Kenyatta from Kenya, or Hastings Banda from Malawi, or Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana, or W. Thompson from Jamaica, and many others. And then this Congress accelerated the campaign for decolonization in many colonies, both in Africa as well as in the Caribbean, because of its demands that it made to end, colonial rule and end racial discrimination, amongst many other demands. And then in 1957, Ghana becomes the first African country to win its independence against Britain. And then in the same year, the first all African Peoples Conference is convened in Accra, Ghana, and was attended by delegates from independent movements, from areas that were still under colonial rule, and delegates from some independent African states. And then there were 3 All Africa People's Conference that took place in 1958 conferences preceded the founding of the Organization of African Unity. And then in Kenya, the Mau Mau revolts beginning around 1952 would become a major catalyst in Kenya gaining its independence. And then in the early 1960s, over 20 African countries would gain their independence, but mostly would do so through peaceful means. And then in 1963, the Organization of African Unity is formed on the 25th of May, which was the day then declared as African Liberation Day. And then in South Africa in the early 60s, African liberation movements were banned during the 60s, and in the early 70s, late 60s, there was the emergence of the Black consciousness movement, which helped to reshape the political landscape of the country through the influence it had on the 1976 youth uprising. And then during the 1970s and 1980s, the rest of Southern Africa also gained their independence through armed resistance. Mozambique and Angola gaining their independence in 1970 respectively, and Zimbabwe in 1980. And then South Africa at the time was rendered ungovernable for the most parts of the 80s, and is the last country to gain its independence in 1994. And then now we're gonna move to resistance in the diaspora. Resistance to slavery begins on the continent with anti-slave revolts on the coast of Africa and on slave ships, and on arrival in the Americas or Europe, African people resisted their enslavement and formed independent communities. An example of this is in Brazil in the 1600s, a community known as the Palmares, that retained its independence for almost 100 years. And then in Jamaica in the 1800s, a community of runaway, of people that escaped to their freedom was established, known as the Maroons. And then in 1804, Haiti, an island on the Caribbean, would gain its independence. And then the Haitian Revolution is actually the most successful slave rebellion in modern history. And the Africans defeated not only the French, but the British as well, who at the time were the two most powerful European countries. And the beginning of the Haitian Revolution was actually marked by a voodoo spiritual ritual, which highlights the centrality of African resistance in African spirituality, rather, in our resistance. And then in America and the Caribbean, many rebellions against slavery were fought. One of the most famous rebellions is the one that is led by Nat Turner in 1831. Enslaved African people also escaped plantations, and one such person is Mama Harriet Tubman, who escaped and freed herself in 1849 and would make over 13 recorded missions back into the plantations to free other enslaved Africans. And then Edward Wilmot Blyden, who was an educator, was a writer, was a diplomat, a statesperson of Liberia, is actually the first person to use the term Africa for Africans. And in 1851, repatriated to Liberia and had a Back to Africa movement at the time. And then his writings and ideas would influence many to come after him. And then in the 1900, the first Pan-African conference in London was organized by Henry Sylvester Williams, who was a Trinidadian lawyer. Since the first Pan-African Congress, there had been like 8 other congresses, and Du Bois is credited for being instrumental in keeping the congresses organized when they did. The most significant Pan-African Congress is the one that took place in 1945, that had people like Kwame Nkrumah attend. And then in 1914, Marcus Garvey establishes the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. And then the UNIA is the biggest Black organization in modern history today in terms of membership. And then the UNIA had branches all over the world, including South Africa. And at the same time that the Pan-African Congresses were being organized by Du Bois and others, the UNIA also had its international conventions. And then the most significant UNIA convention is the one that took place in 1920. It is at this conference that the Declaration of Negro People's Rights of the World was adopted, and in it, it proclaimed that the red, the black, and the green flag would be the flag for the African nation, and which we were celebrating the centenary of actually this year, and the 31st of August to be the international holiday, which is to be observed and celebrated by all Black people around the world. And then moving on, in 1964, Malcolm X established the Afro-American Organization of Unity, which is modeled on the Organization of African Unity that was established a year earlier. And then at the same time, the civil rights movement in Africa was also gets to its height as Malcolm X is assassinated 1 year after establishing the Organization of Afro-American Unity in 1965, and Martin Luther King is also assassinated in 1968, sorry. And then the Black Power movement in the 70s in America also gains momentum through organizations such as the Black Panther Party and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And then in the late 1980s and in the early 1990s, the new Black Panther Party was established, whose most prominent leader was Khalid Abdul Mohammed. And then Black Lives Matter is today the latest growing display of resistance in America against police brutality within this generation. And yeah, I'll stop there with the timeline. And then I'll just discuss the continuum. That we hope that we gave sufficient information for people to start doing their own research. The aim was not to be detailed, but to try and trace a timeline of resistance in the context of a global African world. As you listened, we hope that you found the connections in how our struggles have influenced each other, thus showing that that it is actually one struggle around the world. Some of these critical connections, which I hope you took note of, was how the biggest organization in modern history, the UNIA, was influenced by the Back to Africa work of Wilmot Blyden earlier before him, and how the UNIA had many branches all over the world, including the continent, and that years after the establishment of the UNIA, people like Kwame Nkrumah would actually admit how they were inspired by Marcus Garvey. And the fact of the Pan-African Congress in 1945 being a catalyst in the decolonization, or rather the process of African countries gaining their independence, in that it was attended by people who would be influential in their independence, in their respective independence movements in their countries. And also the modeling of the OAAU after the OAU is an obvious example, at least to me, that Malcolm X had some sort of recognition of the connection between our struggles. And as well, Malcolm X, his parents were also Garveyites influencing him. And also examples of resistance have in the 1800s have always been a source of strength. Even today, we study history, we study all of these resistance that happened at that time for inspiration and for strength today, and for the revolutionaries of the 1960s on the continent. And then to conclude, the history that we have presented is a small fraction, and it is on a surface level of the entire history of African resistance. We chose to do an introductory exploration of multiple examples of resistance because we felt the need to highlight that we do have a long history of resistance on the continent and in the diaspora, and that our ancestors actually resisted invasion, slavery, colonization, apartheid, and did not just accept it, and did not accept it without resisting or fighting. And also to highlight the connectedness and oneness of our global struggle, and therefore to foster an understanding that we have a culture of resistance which we should not only be proud of, but to continue, and that even the organization of this education masterclass lecture series by A Rise Back Child should actually be viewed as a continuation of resistance on some level, and that we are a people being warred against, and therefore we need to, at this present time, emulate our ancestors who paid the ultimate price for our race, because African people have not gained their true independence. We are also still invaded both on our lands and on our minds, and this is the case globally. Thus, we also have a responsibility to resist on an individual level in our minds and expel the invaders, in our minds by the study of history. Also to be reminded that our efforts of resistance should not only be focused within our countries whose borders we were not responsible for creating anyway, but our resistance should always have a global framework or a global vision. And then our struggle must be to regain true power, like real Black power that will have a decisive impact on world affairs. We must organize ourselves continentally and with the diaspora at a grassroots level to realize our collective victory. And I thought to also end this that we can reflect on, and even when we are on our own, just to think of these questions. That is it important to study our history of struggle as one struggle, and if not, why not? And then the next question is, how do we resist the invaders in our minds as individuals on our day-to-day, in our day-to-day activities? And then the last question is, how do we practically sustain efforts such as these education masterclasses and other lecture series that are being hosted by others that seek to help re-educate us? Thank you.
Brother Yonela, thank you so much for that very informative lesson. We truly appreciate it. I think to both you and also Stebo, we truly appreciate you taking your time to consolidate all of this information and coordinate and facilitate it as well as you did. We truly appreciate it. Sir, those last questions you asked for reflection, I'll appreciate if you can just type them up for us, even if it's on the WhatsApp group, so that we can just have them for people to reflect on. So thank you. Yes, that will be perfect as well. Thank you so much. I must thank everyone who attended as well. There would be no masterclass without participant, obviously. So we truly appreciate people's commitment. We appreciate people, sacrificing their time and sacrificing their data. I know the data struggle is very unfriendly. So we truly appreciate it. It speaks volumes about your thirst, your hunger to know more about your history, but obviously to translate that into an agency, a strategy of what you can do as well to make your input and your contribution to making Africa great again. I share sentiments with Sinomhlobo. She said, she gets truly inspired and gets a sense of pride when she hears about, the resistance that some of our ancestors, had, the spirit they had to fight against colonialism. And we should really be inspired. We should really take from history. Remember, history, we're not just trying to gather history and then it ends there. History must always impact our present day reality, and we must always see how we can use whatever it is we know to have our input as well in that regard. So thank you so much to everyone. I appreciate everyone as well for the assignments, the tasks that they had from the last session. I want to give people just a bit of an extension because quite a few people were saying, they couldn't get a chance to finish. So I will give everyone until Tuesday. Tuesday will be the last day. If you didn't get a chance to submit or to finish your assessment task, you have until Tuesday, and then you obviously going to send that to our email address. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back next week, and we will be talking about the effects of colonization, specifically the socio-economic effects of colonization. We will also take a discussion on the rise of African independence. And this is where we're going to talk about the Pan-African leaders, your Kwame Nkrumahs and all of those people that arose and also fought against colonization. So please come back next week. We will continue to learn. We will continue to be emancipated. We will continue to know our history so that we can translate that into a strategy, into an agency of playing our part in that regard. So I appreciate everyone. I appreciate our lecturers. Thank you so much. We can take maybe 2 or 3 inputs or reflections on Brother Yonela's lesson. If there's anyone who wants to say something or ask something based on what Brother Yonela was talking about, I'll allow about 3 people, and then just keep it 1 minute at the most each. I'm not seeing a hand. I'm not seeing anyone unmuting their mics. I'm assuming then that everyone is happy. No one has anything to say. Brother Dira, you've unmuted your mic. I reckon you want to say something.
Yes, I just wanted to highlight something.
Brother Dira, just speak louder or come closer to your device because we can't really hear you properly.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Can you hear me? Okay. Now, I just wanted to highlight regarding the issue of Marcus Garvey. I think it's better for us, especially for those who still learning about this, to go back and get information about Booker T. Washington. That's why Marcus Garvey managed to go to America to meet with Booker T. Washington. And then when he arrived there, he found out Booker T. Washington is died. Then the name of the book where the people can find is Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington. And they will also need to understand in terms of the resistance, in terms of Booker T. Washington and Du Bois, their battle, or Du Bois had a battle with Booker T, then had a battle again with Garvey. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Dira, for that input. And I must say, we can't obviously cover everything in these lessons. They are there to inspire us to go back and do more research. So please take it upon yourself to also go back, do some research on all of this stuff. And then, Brother Dira, I know you are a very resourceful person. If you have any information, any books regarding topics that we covered today, please share them with us on the WhatsApp group. I also saw that Sister Sheena said she's willing to assist with research, that has to do with, how things are set out geographically and things like that. So if you also have information or links to share with us, please feel free to do so on our group. Is there anyone else that has an input, a question, a remark? Right. I take it that everyone is happy. No one is asking anything. No one is saying anything. So allow me to wrap tonight's session. Thank you once again for pulling through. Thank you once again for your commitment. Thank you once again to our lecturers that have put in immense effort to put together today's sessions and coordinate them the way that they did. It was truly informative. Thank you so much, guys. That will be it for tonight. Harambe.
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 Thank you, everyone. You're most welcome to.
Harambe.
Harambe, aluta continua.
Chupe. Kena mo bateng o tlhape.
Harambe.